Hi guys, James at RampantLionReviews again for you today with another beer review. For this one we are going to do another in my sort of mini series of German Brauhaus beers that I've been doing for you. So we're going to return once again to Magdeburg in Saxony-Anhalt in Germany, and of course I'm talking about Pribatbrauerei Diamant, and today we're going to taste the Breyhan Tafelbier. I'm not sure what Breyhan is, but it means sort of panel beer, but this guy is a traditional Bock beer, which, as you'll know if you've watched my channel before, it is actually one of my favourite German styles of beer. I really love a really good Bock beer, and the Weisser Bock that I reviewed from these guys before was really good, so I'm very hopeful for this beer. But anyway, as is usual with my beer reviews then, I'll take you through a very brief history of the brewery. It will only be a minute or two long, but if you do want to get straight to the tasting, just fast forward. The brewery website's in the video description for you below, along with a link to my other Diamant Brauerei reviews that I've done for you, and there will be more added to that in the near future, I'm sure. So anyway, to tell you about Magdeburg actually, Magdeburg is a town of about 230,000 people, and it's located to the southwest of Berlin. It's kind of on the way to Hanover, which is why we visited it in fact, but it's the capital city of the German state of Saxony-Anhalt. But it's quite an interesting place because it kind of typifies the sort of the kind of recent German history, if you like. In the western side of the city you have the Altstadt, which is all the beautiful old buildings, but in the eastern side you have a lot of the old communist concrete flat blocks and things like that. So it's a very interesting place actually, and there's a really beautiful riverfront, and it really is definitely worth going and visiting if you want to see what East Germany was like outside of Berlin. So do go and check it out. It's a really nice town, and the locals were all very friendly, so do go and check it out. But anyway, to tell you about the brewery itself, the Privatbrauerei Diamant began when Albert and Hermann Wernicke founded Brauerei AH Wernicke in Berliner Straße in Magdeburg back in the year 1841. But the brewery expanded over the next few years due to ever-increasing demand for their beer, and because of this they decided to go all out and invest quite heavily in their brewing equipment. So of course at this time they were actually one of the best equipped breweries in Saxony-Anhalt. But the company was turned into a public limited company in 1872, mainly as a result of Hermann's death, but also as a result of Albert's long-standing illness. But luckily Hermann's son Gustav took over the running of the brewery and expanded it even further to include a private ice house, or Eiskeller as they would call it in German, a maltshouse, maltings, and also a railway connection too. And if you go and research a lot of the histories of the German breweries, they really do like to mention the fact of when their infrastructure was expanded, if you like. So I think it's just the kind of German business mindset, and they take great pride in the fact that their businesses are growing. So it's always interesting to research breweries from different countries because it gives you a sort of different perspective on the history. But anyway, in the early 20th century the brewery actually acquired the Feldschossen brewery in Wittenberg, and also formed an association with other breweries in Ochersleben, Zerbst, and also in Leipzig as well. So as you can see, the brewery was quite active in the state of Saxony-Anhalt. But in 1937 they introduced the Diamant trademark, for which they are now known, and if you translate Diamant into English it literally means diamond, so the brewery is kind of called the Diamond Brewery, which is quite funny actually. But during the war the brewery was heavily damaged but recovered quickly to become a state-owned enterprise known as VEB Brauerei Magdeburg Neustadt. And the brewery was again modernised in the 1960s before it once again became a private enterprise in 1991 when it became under the ownership of First Kulmbach Actien Brauerei. And this brewery actually typifies a lot of the story that you'll find if you go and research the Eastern European breweries. A lot of them were privately owned enterprises until the Second World War. They were destroyed with all the bombing raids and things like this. Then they became state-owned enterprises under the old communist regimes, and then in 1991 they became private again, and they've been built up by other companies outside. So it's a very typical thing with Germany. As you'll know, West Germany was established in 1945 after the war. You had East Germany, which was the Russian occupation zone. The West was the Americans in the north, the British in sort of Bavaria, and you had the French over in Baden-Württemberg. And then it was just different regimes, and then Germany was sadly torn apart after that. And it was a real shame because the Germans have a very, very rich culture, but thankfully now they are reunited and doing very well as a country, as I'm sure many of you will know. But this brewery kind of highlights that typical German history of recent times. But the original brewery building for Brauerei Diamant is in Lübeckestrasse, but it's largely a ruin today. However, since 2006, brewmaster Friedrich Silva has brewed beer in a small building on this site, and the community founded a museum to the original brewery in 2005, and the Brauhaus is actually located in the oldest building on this old brewery site, which was the building itself was built in the year 1841. So when you go and visit the Diamant Brauhaus, it is in one of the very old buildings of the original brewery site. So very, very cool actually, and the beer is good, is really good quality, so I would recommend that you do it. And Magdeburg is a very beautiful town too, so it's a very interesting place. German history is very rich when you go back to the likes of Bismarck, then the hyperinflation and things like that, and even into the modern era. German history, in my opinion, is one of the most rich in the world. It's a very interesting topic of study. But anyway, to list the other beers that you can get from these guys, there is the Breyhan Tafelbier, which is this guy here, a Bock beer. There's the Fest beer, which is a Maibock, Fritzens Weizen, Hefeweizen beer, Luxator, which is a typical German style, the unfiltered Pils unfiltert as it's called in German, Diamant Schwarzbier, a black beer, Weihnachtsbier, Christmas beer, and also the Weisser Bock, which, as I told you in my last review, was a kind of hybrid between Munich Helles and a sort of Maibock beer, not a Maibock, a sort of Hefeweizen. It was a very interesting beer, so do give it a try if you get the chance. But anyway, let's move on to the tasting of this guy itself. As I told you, this is a traditional Bock beer. It comes in at 7% ABV, but unfortunately the brewery website doesn't list the various hops and malts that actually go into this beer, so let me just bring up the camera and make sure you're seeing that. But when I translated Breyhan Tafelbier, I put it into Google Translate and it wouldn't translate it. It said it was just Breyhan panel beer, so I'm not sure if that actually has any reference there. But as you can see, there's an old building on it there, and down here is the typical Brauerei Diamant symbol. So a nice kind of shiny diamond. Zeit 1841, founded 1841 as we discussed in the history, but it looks a very nice beer. And you can see Magdeburg Neustadt, which is the eastern portion of Magdeburg city, and it has a typical pop cap, as is always the case with a lot of these German Brauhaus beers. But without further ado, let's pop this guy open and we'll get on with the tasting. There we are, nice pop as you always expect from these beers, but the last one I had didn't actually do that. But a nice smoky opening as we pop it open. And I'm just going to pour a little bit short at the top of the glass on this one, because I am sharing this beer with my dad. He always enjoys trying the various beers that I review for you on the channel, so I'm going to share this one with him. But we'll just pour that for the moment and I'll let it settle. But as you can see, it's poured exactly as you would expect a German Bock beer. It's a nice kind of rosewood, kind of slightly ebony colour actually, almost like the same colour as Coca-Cola actually. But you can see it's got a nice 2.5 finger frothy kind of beigey tan coloured head. If I put my fingers behind it, it's not transparent in the slightest, very, very dark. But there's a lot of carbonation visible rushing towards the bottom of the head in this one. It looks a very, very nice beer. So it's, yeah, actually beautiful. A little bit of a ruby edge to it. It really is almost the same colour as Coca-Cola, but a nice rosewoody characteristic in colour of this one. But let's give it a smell and see how we get on here. So as is typical with the German Brauhaus beers, you'll get a big kind of rye bready nose out of this one. I really love this brewery. The quality of the beer that comes out of Diamant is really, really good. One of my favourite German Brauhauses I've come across, in fact. But it's typical of Germany just to have such good beer. So if you've never been there, you know, and you love beer, you know, you'll go over there and you'll be in heaven. But it's got a nice kind of dark roasted brown sugar coming out of it. Quite sweet caramel actually, even though it's roasted, it is still quite sweet rather than being a more dark and kind of bitter caramel, I think. But there's a nice toasted bread character coming out of this. A lot of the German Brauhaus beer has this nice big, slightly rye breadish character that comes out in the aroma. But you can smell just a little bit of red fruit coming out too, so you've got a nice kind of plum and raisin or figgy aroma coming out here. Mainly a figgy aroma in the nose actually. you maybe get a bit more sweetness in the taste. So without further ado, let's get on and give this guy a taste. So this is the Breyhan Tafelbier from Pribatbrauerei Diamant Magdeburg in Saxony-Anhalt in Germany. Prost! Yeah, this is quite interesting because when you take it in on your first sip, you get quite a bit of the sort of red fruit flavours coming out. It's quite sharp on the plums and raisins and figs. More of a plum and raisiny flavour actually, that kind of slightly sharper red fruit flavour coming out. That's the ester character in the beer. But it's a huge malty beer, this. You've got a nice big sweet caramel malt base, maybe even a little bit of sort of treacle or molasses notes in there. But it's this big bready character, slightly rye bread like I said, and that just blankets the middle of the tongue there. It's really nicely done. It's a bit, when I get a big German bready beer, that's me in heaven. I really love that particular flavour. And the Bock beer is really beautifully done. When it's got a nice big bready characteristic to it, it's just absolutely beautiful, and this guy has that. So yeah, a nice kind of red fruity sweetness into this one. The sweetness is actually quite prominent, but maybe it's just because the beer is getting towards its drink by date, and that can be a thing with these sort of German dark beers from the Brauhauses. You can get a little bit of oxidation in them just as they get towards the end of the date. So maybe it is just a tad oxidised, but there's a really nice kind of sweet red fruit estery character in this one, and it's nicely done. It's more of a plum and raisiny flavour. It does have that sharpness about it, but underneath all that you've got a nice rye bready blanket across the tongue there, and a big bready, it's a big bready blanket basically, and on top of that there's a little bit of a slightly roasted caramel, maybe even a little bit of darker treacle notes, and perhaps some kind of sweeter cereal element to it as well. So it's a really just interesting flavour of beer, this. But yeah, around the edge of the tongue is really where you're getting these kind of sharper fruity esters. Around the edge there, even when you go further back, you're getting a nice little bit of fruitiness, which is quite unusual. Usually if you go further to the back of the palate, right on the edges of the tongue, you're getting a bit more of an earthy hop character, then it builds into that sort of fruity ester character that you expect of a red fruit flavour. But it's very nicely done. Not really getting any alcohol warmth out of this one actually, but what really separates a kind of a Brauhaus Bock beer from the more mass-produced ones like Paulaner or Salvatore and all of these kind of things, it's just the sort of smoothness and the presence of the bready malt, I think. And that's the key difference between a Brauhaus beer and a more mass-produced Bock. But this is a really, really nice Bock. It's just an interesting blend of flavour. It's got a nice smooth malt base, but the fruit, the sharpness of the fruit in this one is actually quite good, and it offers a good contrast between the flavours. So definitely worth checking out if you enjoy the German Bock beers. Maybe the caramel is a little bit less prominent in this one in comparison with some of the others. It is more of a bread forward and fruit forward flavour, I think, but it's very nice and worth trying. In terms of the mouthfeel, I would say quite mid-bodied, nice smooth German carbonation, a more malt forward beer, but at the same time you do have quite a sharp fruity character to this one. So it's very nicely done. The mouthfeel is slightly oily as well, and that helps bring out these estery fruit characteristics. But overall, it's another very, very good beer from Privatbrauerei Diamant Magdeburg. So if you do get the chance to go to Berlin and you fancy a little trip outside of the city, go to Magdeburg and try some of the beer. And the city, as I told you, really does highlight the kind of rich East-West German history sort of thing. Really worth going to see. But anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this beer review and that doing Brauhaus beers isn't too obscure for you. I hope you enjoy it nonetheless. Please let me know in the comments section if you happen to have tried this beer yourself. Always interesting to hear other people's thoughts on it. In the meantime though, please like, subscribe, share, all the usual YouTube stuff. I'm going to go away and share the rest of this beer with my dad. I hope you've enjoyed the review, and I will catch you soon. Slàinte.